I'm now going to turn it over to a couple of folks who are working more in the practitioner end, and could you bring up the next PowerPoint, please? I think it's Robin next, is that right? Yes, indeed it is. So I'll turn it over to Robin, and who's going to talk a little bit about amphibians and AZE.
Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to focus on amphibians and what we, the Amphibian Survival Alliance, are doing around the world to target and protect amphibians, specifically in the AZE sites. So just to set the context, amphibians are the most Seems a bit of a lag, it's jumping ahead. Let's go through.
Having the opposite problem to the one I had.
Can you set it back from there?
The gentleman there may be able to help us with that.
Can you get it back to the beginning? It seems to be running through. Well, that was my presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay, I think there's a little lag. I'm just going to press it once and hope it goes on to the next slide here. Can you advance it from there if I just tell you? It might be easier. Okay, so just to set the context. So amphibians are the most threatened group. Oh. Okay, it's going through. Maybe it's set on a timer. So a third of amphibians are classified as threatened. Okay, it's got a mind of its own. And a quarter are data deficient. The IUCN currently estimates about a half of over 7,000 known species of amphibian are threatened with extinction. This is a higher proportion than any other group. 9 out of 10 of those threatened amphibians are threatened by habitat loss. So habitat loss is the #1 threat to amphibian survival in the long term. And one of our main approaches, therefore, is to address that threat. We've got the next. This is produced after AZE came out. This is amphibian AZE sites around the world. Red is not protected, green is protected. And as you can see, we realized we had some work to do. A lot of the amphibians fall through the gaps in protected areas, having very small ranges, and over half of AZE trigger species are actually amphibians. So the amphibians make up most of amphibian trigger species in most of the AZE sites. Next slide. So in response to this threat and the lack of a real sort of global body addressing threats to amphibians, and specifically the threat of habitat loss to amphibians, the Amphibian Survival Alliance was formed about 3 years ago, and it's over 100 partners now. It's the largest global partnership for amphibian conservation, and the idea is really for it to be an umbrella body to leverage resources and rise to the challenge of trying to protect amphibian habitats around the world. Next slide. So the Amphibian Specialist Group of the IUCN provides scientific underpinning. There's over 400 experts around the world, amphibian experts, that we use to inform and advise us. So it helps us to sort of ground truth the situation on the ground. So we use the global analyses, and we really try to sort of ground truth to make sure it reflects the situation on the ground. Next slide. So really in response to the need to protect amphibian habitats, we set up a mechanism called the Leapfrog Conservation Fund with really 4 sort of founding partners: Amphibian Survival Alliance, Rainforest Trust, Global Wildlife Conservation, and then Saving Family Foundation, with the goal of trying to leverage other resources to direct them to protecting critical amphibians for critical habitat for amphibians around the world. Next slide. One example of an approach that we have taken, and this is really sort of building on a track record of prioritizing and trying to protect amphibians. And Sierra Coral in Guatemala is one AZE site that was identified as a priority for conservation in Guatemala. Next slide. It's right here where the frog is, right on the border of Guatemala and Honduras. Next slide. It's a tract of beautiful and intact rainforest. Next slide. With the top two are AZE amphibians. So we've got a couple of AZE salamanders, and then below are a couple of other species. The one on the left is critically endangered, but also within the same habitat. Next slide. But an imminent threat to the area from clearing and cattle ranching. So we convened 19 different partners, supporters, came together to leverage the funding needed to empower the local NGO Funda Eco to actually acquire this area and set up a new protected area. Next slide. And the outcome is a 47,000 acre national protected area was declared to protect this forest and its inhabitants. Next slide. So there should be a map there that shows. Okay, there should be a map on the previous one. This is what's next. So yeah, the previous map. So there should be a map here showing what sites we're actually working on now. I put this together on a Mac, so I guess the PC doesn't like it. But I could just talk about then a couple of our big upcoming projects. If you go on to the next one. Next slide, please. So, building on the success of Sierra Coral, we're taking that model and we've identified another AZE site, the Cuchimatanes Mountains in northern Guatemala, northwest. Next slide. I got to go there in July just to visit the area, some beautiful cloud forest. Next slide. And home to, this is one of the AZE amphibians. It disappeared for 32 years before being rediscovered, which also highlights the importance of ground truthing, just to validate that these species are still there. Many amphibians have not been seen in years or decades, so it's important also to verify if these sites are still important, if these species are still there. Next slide. And this is the other AZE species, little tree frog. Next slide. And this area is also habitat for some other incredible species. This is the long-limbed salamander, Nyctinolus pernix. It's not an AZE because it occurs in a couple of different sites, but it's highly threatened. Next slide. And here it is, and it's the rainforest habitat, the cloud forest up there in the Cuchimatanes. Really incredible animal. Next slide. Another threatened amphibian species from the area. So using the AZE, we really target these areas. We home in on the sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of priorities for conservation. And in doing so, we're protecting a whole range of other threatened species. Next slide. This is a species that was just discovered and described in 2012. Will likely qualify for AZE once it's described, its status is attributed, because it likely only occurs here. Next slide. So we're currently working on an opportunity to protect this area. It's 2,000 acres of cloud forest habitat that the local NGO has negotiated with landowners and communities to acquire and protect it. So we're currently in the process of trying to fundraise $680,000 to make that happen. And again, we're using the Leapfrog Conservation Fund to try and get matching leverage support. Next slide. So anyone who's familiar with the AZE is probably familiar with the Massif de la Hotte in Haiti. When the AZE first came out, when the paper was published in 2005, this was the #1 site in the world for AZE species. At that time, it had 13 amphibians, critically endangered or endangered amphibians found nowhere else. That's now 17. And so we've been sort of targeting this area for quite some time, you know, because it was highlighted as the most important site for amphibian conservation. We felt a sort of obligation to try and see what we could do. Next slide. And contrary to popular or common belief, even within Haiti, there is still some beautiful forest. This is cloud forest in the Massif de la Haute, these tree ferns. So there is still habitat there worth saving. And we did an expedition there in 2010, next slide, and we found 6 frogs that hadn't been seen in 20 years, 6 AZE amphibians that hadn't been seen in 20 years, including this. You can probably see why that hadn't been seen in a while. One of the smallest frogs in the world. Next slide. And there's another AZE frog that was rediscovered. So this ground truthing is important just to validate again that these species are there. So we confirmed that this was still a priority site for amphibian conservation. Next slide. And we've also been working with the communities. What I realized when I started going to Haiti was that there's a very negative perception towards frogs, as there is in many parts of the world. They think that they pee in your eye and make you blind. So it's important to sort of work within that local context and try and change perceptions. So we set up a program called Frame of Mind, working with young Haitians to sort of teach them about amphibians and conservation in general. And next slide. Basically using cameras, we gave each of the kids cameras, we taught them how to use them, taught them how to tell stories about conservation that were relevant to their lives. So talking about charcoal, talking about fresh water. And we produced this book that we distributed to the kids. We're working on distributing it to schools for environmental education. We had a photo exhibit where the family, the decision makers, the environment minister for the region came. And he was challenged by an 11-year-old girl on his reforestation policy for the national park. So it was quite a powerful conduit for getting the environmental message out there. And next slide. This is one story put together by one of the children about the charcoal. So just looking at where their charcoal comes from, its uses, and the impact it has on the environment, just to get them understanding the sort of consequences of deforestation and the impact it has on their lives. Next slide. And we went back 6 months later just to ask the kids what they'd got out of it, and it got them all thinking about conservation. Thankfully, one on the bottom right said it got her thinking about protecting frogs, so that was the main thing. Next slide. So over the last 4 years, expeditions have been going out to try and identify priority sites for conservation in Haiti, specifically the Massif de la Haute, but also other areas. So taking the AZE and trying to identify opportunity to where the priority habitats that these frogs are occurring in. Next slide. And we now have a map of 12 different sites where sort of priority meets opportunity. So these are areas that have been identified that are sort of imminent priorities for conservation in Haiti, for site-level conservation if we want to protect Haiti's biodiversity. Next slide. This is the number one, Mont-Brambois in the Massif de la Haute. Still has a nice tract of forest, has a number of amphibians, AZE, and 2 brand new species, which likely only live on this mountaintop. So once they're described, once their status is assessed, they will also be likely AZE species. Next slide. This is one frog that occurs there, a beautiful little frog with red eyes, AZE frog. Next slide. And now we're looking at an opportunity to establish the first ever network of private protected areas in Haiti. So similar to this AZE Netherlands approach, where much of our work is enabling local NGOs to acquire and protect land. Amphibians often occur in very small tracts of habitats. It's really an opportunity to get bang for the buck in terms of protecting small tract of land with high biodiversity and highly threatened species. So we actually have land titles notarized for the first site, Grambois, 1,000 acres, and we have a $1 million commitment to start leveraging to set up this first ever network of private protected areas. So as we go forward, we're looking for additional partners and supporters to really try and help us leverage this and ultimately hopefully set up a trust fund for Haiti that will enable them the local partners for Société Audubon Haiti to protect and manage these areas that are outside of the current protected areas in Haiti. Okay, thank you.
So it turns out they didn't all go extinct, and you can do conservation for these species, even in places that a lot of people seem to think are among the more difficult places to work. And we can get it done, it turns out. But you need to take it on and try it. And if you do, great things happen, as Robin's just told us.